Welcome back to the summit, everyone. My next speaker is Tammy Dunnett. Tammy Dunnett is the founder and CEO of Relationship Revolution, focused on changing the way relationships are done one conversation at a time. As an ex-target of workplace bullying, Tammy shared her simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies to help you navigate difficult conversations while keeping your relationships intact. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Trina. I'm delighted to be here.
Tammy, tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and who you serve.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm an ex-target of workplace bully. And so that happened, I'd like to say, many years ago. And as I was going through my healing journey and recovering, I realized there was more to this than I understood. And so I went back to school and I studied what we call lateral violence or horizontal violence in the workplace. Spent 4 years in my master's diving into that topic so that I knew it from every possible angle, plus my own personal experience. And what I realized is what I was looking for when I was looking for the answers, it's not that they didn't exist, it's just that we're not taught them. And so with that, I happen to also be teaching communication skills at a local nursing college. And this triple factor, as I kind of call it, the personal experience, the communication, and the research, allowed me to create some really great resources to help our students succeed in places that they wouldn't have dreamed of succeeding in before.
Tammy, we have a similar background. You're in nursing. I'm not a nurse, but I worked for many years back in my corporate days, building parts of the electronic medical record software in hospital organizations. And that was one of the things that I saw as a huge problem is bullying in the workplace between peers. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so glad that you are doing this work. And it really does communicate across fields.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with this summit, as we were talking about before we kind of decided we're going to do this interview and go ahead, we were talking about the market that you're serving and these coaches, and they're building their business to 6 figures and beyond. And as an entrepreneur myself, I know the reason I went into entrepreneurship was to get away from the very people that I didn't want to work with anymore. Yeah. And then I find myself having to still deal with those personalities because, as you know, you cannot have a business without people. Whether you're serving them or you're hiring them or you're working alongside them as partners, there is going to be conflict. And so we thought this was going to be a great fit to help your coaches who are building their business get some strategies to help them succeed.
That's brilliant because there are so many sources of conflict. And as coaches, you know, we talk about like the law of attraction and, you know, we are building based on what we're trying to attract and we're designing from our perspective. Well, here's the thing. Each individual is designing from their perspective. Mm. And sometimes those perspectives don't clash.
You're right, they sure do.
And so let's talk a little bit about the kinds of conflict that coaches might experience. I think one, as we're building our businesses and working with clients and meeting prospects and bringing new people in, sometimes we come across those clients or audience members who are challenging.
I do love a good challenge, and maybe that's
yes.
why I'm so well suited to this line of work is helping people navigate hard conversations. And partly it probably comes from my success as a nurse. Like when you have these professional roles, you're not allowed to just go off on somebody. You have to find a way to connect. And I was very successful at that as a nurse with my patients, with family, with colleagues, and it just morphed into this bigger business. I would get asked all the time for support. So as you know, I also have a coach, and I think anyone who's in coaching knows the value of a coach. And I put this question to the other people in my group to say, hey, what are some of the things you've been struggling with lately? And we do have people at different journeys in their entrepreneurial business. And what I found is that what comes up most at the beginning is when we get an email of hate or dislike. And, you know, we're working so hard and we put all of our love into our projects like this summit, for example, that you're building. We put in a tremendous amount of time behind the scenes to provide an event of value. And when somebody complains about it, it can hurt really deeply because you just want to serve. We just want to serve.
Yeah.
And what I find for those who are at the beginning stages is those are kind of the things they're navigating is, how do I stay in line with my values? How do I run a business but still keep everybody happy?
Mm, mm.
And how do I be okay if they're not happy? So those are some of the conversations that come up early. And I'm going to kind of summarize the pathway for all of them as we get through this piece. But those who are later in their journey are now hiring maybe a virtual assistant for the first time. So it's kind of the next level in their business growth is, I don't need somebody full-time, but I need somebody part-time. And a virtual assistant is all the rage. And so how do I navigate cross-culturally or across the times, or maybe even generational ideas, those kind of things that come up? How do I even know that I'm getting what I'm paying for? Those kind
Yeah.
of managing performance and conduct in a virtual world. To those who are actually building out their team, maybe they've got a partner. I do know, I just talked recently to somebody who has hired a friend to do the photography
Ooh,
for their business and the videography for their business, but they're not happy with the product. So they reached out to me to say, how do I have this conversation and kind of fire her because we want to go with somebody else? So there's a whole stage of growth as people build out their business where conflict and tension can come up and will feel like you're having to sacrifice a relationship to move forward.
that's brilliant. Yes, I definitely want to talk about that. And I think one of the earliest things as coaches when they first start is having those difficult conversations with family who may not understand. And especially if they haven't, those coaches haven't yet built those healthy boundaries of what they talk to their family about.
Yes. And if the family is going to be involved in any way, we typically look to family to be our first employees of a non-paying kind of contribution. Help me out here, help me out there. So I think in any of those circumstances, there's you need to know what you're looking for to build. And sometimes when you're becoming the CEO of your business, stepping into that role can be really scary because you will have people who are not happy. But I look at objections, as an opportunity to get better.
Yeah.
What is it that you're looking for? Did I serve it? Did I not serve it? Is this something that's even possible? Can we close the gap here? And if not, then maybe did I not, was I not clear up front as to what you're getting? These are all opportunities to help clear any miscommunication for the next time you make an offer in terms of a summit, those kind of things.
That's brilliant. And Tammy, we've been colleagues for a while, and it's been, I've heard the story a couple of times, but I think it's so important to share with the audience, if you're willing to share it, about early on in your career when you were having a difficult interaction with a person and you realized, you thought you were communicating clearly, and you thought that you were communicating compassionately, but there was something that was in the way. And once you realized it, all of a sudden things became much clearer to you.
Yeah. And I would say I didn't know what it was at first. Back when I was being targeted, I didn't know that I was being targeted initially. And I thought it was a bad boss. And this is really common when people come to talk to me about how do I navigate this situation. We hear stories like, well, they promote those who are incompetent. They haven't had enough training. And then you get really bad advice to just keep your head low, don't say anything, float under the radar. But that doesn't feel good with our values. It's a mismatch.
And we can't do that as CEOs of our business.
No, right? And so you need to step into those moments, and we're not trained how to do that. Just like I wasn't trained how to have those hard conversations when I was being bullied. I thought I was doing the right thing based on all of those previous experiences I had had on the playground, in the workplace, with my friends and family. But I found out I only knew one thing, and that was to be assertive, to communicate my needs and to make sure that you heard them so that I could have my peaceful workplace. What I found out is that her only way to communicate was assertive. The two of us were using the same style, essentially using the same hammer at different times, but we're not getting anywhere. And it wasn't until after my healing journey, actually, that I realized there were so many more ways to approach a conflict. I just didn't know how. And it was what I was asking for during it. I was begging people, just tell me, what do I say? How do I deal with this? I'm ill-equipped. I don't know what's wrong, because I thought I had the right tool for the job. And it was after the fact, when I realized so many more things, I was able to release all of that past pain, because she didn't know any better either. And ironically, I was given another opportunity in another job to practice what I had learned. I didn't know it was coming my way, but there I am in a new job, thinking that leaving is healing. Hello, entrepreneurs. I wasn't an entrepreneur at this point, but it is one of the reasons people jump into their own business. And I met with somebody who sounds like and talks like the same person who was a trigger for me in the past.
I'd like to pause for a second and ask the audience, how often has that happened? You leave a situation or you end a relationship because of the way a certain person acts, a certain personality, and you think, well, that person is gone and in my past. And you almost immediately find someone else with a different name, a different hairstyle, but the same personality. And what I loved about what you did, Tammy, was that you actually realized that you brought that person with you.
Oh yeah, I was still assertive. I mean, obviously I was spun and I was off on stress leave right away, but as I was on stress leave, I'm like, this is not my bully. This is not the same person. I had to get it re-engaged and then find my pathway forward. So what I had to do was set my intention. And this is one of the 5 steps that I teach people. What's my intention? Not just with this person, but with my job, with my values, with, the circumstances, with my friendships at work. All of those things were kind of discovered as I went through this, but I focused in on my intention with the quote unquote bully, the bad guy, the person who's making me feel bad. And my intention was to close the gap. I knew I loved my job. This is what I hear from so many good people. They're loyal, they're excellent, they're creative, they're so willing to give to the organization. Same thing as an entrepreneur, when they hire people, there's a gap somewhere. And so setting my intention as to what I wanted to do, close the gap, reconnect, and confirm my perception of the events. Because immediately I went to, they're bad, I'm good. They're a bully, I'm a target, right? This is not a safe place, I need to leave. Really common things. And once I was able to figure out what my intention was, then the path revealed. So the second step is to go into purposeful planning. If my intention was to quit, my path would have been very different than an intention to close the gap, which is why setting your intention first, whether you're talking to the first email you get that's a hate mail, which by the way is a sign you've made it, just so you know. Okay. Or you're dealing with that very first virtual assistant, you need to figure out and hash out some boundaries or objectives, or you're dealing with your teammates. What is your intention? Because that will determine your next step. Once you have that, you go into the planning phase in terms of what will I say, when will I say, what's important, what's not, what are my values, what's negotiable, what's non-negotiable. There's a whole lot to consider there. And then you need to do a gut check. This is step 3. Step 3, the gut check is, and we have a lot of people who are great at planning and they know all the things they would do should it come up again, and then they don't do it. And this is where coaches get into trouble, right? This is coaches will not do the thing they need to do and step into that CEO role because they're fearful of hurting someone's feelings. They're afraid of further lashing, like a lashback. Is that the word?
Yep.
Flashback? I don't know.
Lashback.
Yeah. So there is a fear that prevents them from going forward. It's no different than any difficult conversation. The gut check is, am I solid on what I want? Am I solid on where this is coming from? What is the value that's driving me forward? And then step 4 is to do the thing you need to do. Whether that's send an email of inquiry, whether that's get your VA on the phone or on the Zoom to let's talk about things, or that's telling your family who's your board member, maybe we don't work so good together. Let's stay as family members and let's find somebody else for this job. And then the 5th step is to reflect. What happened? Did it go well? What worked? What didn't work? So it's kind of like a really quick 5-step process that I teach all of my clients how to navigate through conflict in whatever it looks like.
I love that. And I love that you've incorporated intention into your 5 steps, because it's our intention that really sets us off in the direction of, will it bring us closer to what we want or away from what we want? Intention in that, I was talking about this a little while ago, but when it's time to pivot, what is our intention with whatever we're working on in our business, in our coaching business? So oftentimes, we call the pivot of like, oh, that's not working, let's do something else. Well, what's the intention? Is it not working because we are struggling with it, we're frustrated, and we just want to do something new? Or is our intention to master this, and we just need to spend a little more time and lean into it? It totally changes what action you take next. And I also love I love the planning. I think many people, it's like, well, the next time that happens, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to, this is how I'm going to respond. And if they say that, this is what I'm going to say. I think most people have the planning down. But once they get the intention done first within your 5-step program, then the planning becomes more effective. And I also love what you mentioned about the gut check, because about the gut check, especially with taking action on it. If it doesn't matter what you'd say that you have that all planned, but if you don't take action on it because you're afraid of hurting feelings, what will happen down the line with that? Will the situation just keep getting worse because you're not taking action in having that difficult conversation or firing that client? Nobody wants to fire a client.
Oh my gosh, I have fired a client before. And, I had struggled with that decision, because when we're starting our business and we're building, we are hungry for any income. It's validating that, it's proof of concept. It's that we have something that's worthwhile, that we're willing to sacrifice our own values and our beliefs just for the income. And I get that. There's no shame and no judgment there. I think every entrepreneur goes through that. And those are great milestones to learn from, especially when you have to fire your first client. How do I do this in a way that still is okay for both of us? Can I send them and refer them somewhere else? Can I be honest and say it's not working for me? Do I need to go to my policies and my procedures and just say X, Y, Z, black and white, here's how it is? What feels best for me?
I love that. And I also love something that you said in relationship to the gut, which was not wanting to make people feel bad and not wanting to hurt feelings. And I think part of coaching is saying hard truths and helping your clients see and understand those hard truths. And sometimes if you had some spinach in your teeth, would you want somebody to say, hey, you got some spinach in your teeth?
Yes, absolutely. Please tell me.
If somebody said, if you just shifted this one way of thinking, would you want to know that if it would bring you to success? Or if it's the thing that is holding you back from taking action? And sometimes, no matter how lovingly you say it still sticks. It still hurts. It still feels like a stab. It's like, oh,
yeah,
somebody just pulled my hair. Somebody just dropped the mic. Somebody just called me out. And I'll tell you, that's one of the things that I respect most in the coaches that I work with, that I hire, that I pay big money for, is, tell me the hard truth. Give me like a verbal smack and to bring me back to sanity, to bring me back to awareness. Like, hey, get out of your head. This is what's going on. Do you see it?
Yeah, so important. And when you were talking about that gut check, that belief piece, that is typically, setting an intention and purposeful planning can still trip you up. No doubt. You can set an intention that feels right. And then as you head down that pathway, something comes in. It's like, you know what? Maybe this wasn't the right decision. That's okay. A good CEO makes a decision. That's what leaders do. And they act on it. If you're going to sit in indecision, that is where most businesses fail. They're too
Yes.
afraid to jump forward. And, honestly, like today I talked to somebody and it was a simple thing like that. They got their first hate mail. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I deal with this? What do I say back? They knew what they wanted. That this person was complaining about the cost of a product. They didn't feel it was fair that they should have to pay a certain price because they didn't get in on the earlier price. And, they were just not happy and gave all the reasons as to why they weren't happy. And I will just share with you, while it's compassion to want to meet them where they are, as a CEO, you can't always do that.
Mm.
As a CEO, you have to make the hard decisions. You can still deliver bad news in a very compassionate way.
Yes.
That builds the relationship.
Yes. And it's what I love about that. I mean, you said so many awesome things there, because being a CEO is making decisions. It's making fast decisions. Hell is indecision. Not knowing what, over deliberating, over analyzing, being caught in the I don't know is pure hell. All right. But once you make a decision, if you make a fast decision, then you can make a fast change to the decision. It's not so much failure. It's just like, oh, well, that didn't go over well. Let's shift this a little bit and let's have this conversation now.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I equate the speed so much as the actual act of the decision. For some people, they need to think about all the angles and all the potentials, and that can be dangerous. You can get stuck in inaction if you're thinking about too many things. And so maybe that's where the speed comes, is make a decision, move forward, learn from it. You can always course correct. You can always come back, have a different conversation. I was thinking more in terms of just stepping into your CEO persona, and that's so hard for people who are just kind of like getting to that first 100,000, because they are pretty much the business. They're wearing all of the hats. I mean, sometimes I want to fire myself. I need to hire somebody over in this particular special, and it's on my agenda. It's going to happen at some point in the future. But you know what I'm saying? It's like sometimes it's difficult to step in and say, even myself, I'm in my own way, maybe. Having those conversations with yourself can be even the hardest. Mm-hmm. And how do you have that with somebody else? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for this lady, just to close that loop there with the one who was like, what do I say to this person who's sent me this hate mail? It was really about, you kind of love them and leave them, in the sense that, thank you. I always love to say to somebody, and this is a great hot tip for anybody listening. I love to say, if someone's angry at me, first of all, I say, I feel so appreciated that you feel safe enough to share this with me. These are kind of like intense emotions. These are personal things that you're giving me as reasons as to why you believe a certain thing. So I honor the space that you're giving and sharing this with me. I acknowledge your feelings. I acknowledge your circumstances. Here's how I see things. Here's my options I can offer you. I might be able to give them what they want, but if I can't, what can I do in place? How can I substitute so that the relationship is still intact? And sometimes there's nothing you can do other than to offer that ear that, I appreciate that you've done this and you've brought this to my attention. I'm going to work to make it better. And, I thank you for that.
Even though this was just an example, I felt my shoulders drop. I'm like, oh, that's such a compassionate way to both honor the person who is bringing their concern to you and to stand your ground.
It probably comes from my nursing background, to be honest. I mean, really, every single day, every patient I come into is in a troubled place. They're not happy with the pace in which I serve them. They're not happy with the food. They're not happy with what the doctor said. Like, you're always having to navigate these troubled waters and still make it therapeutic. That was always my goal. How do I connect with you through this?
And what I saw you bring into this and incorporate into that response is a basic yet vital coaching skill, and that's acknowledging and validating.
Fundamental.
It's fundamental. And just because it's fundamental does not mean that it's not important. It's probably one of the most important coaching skills, is that acknowledging and validating.
That's the closest way to close the gap.
Yeah.
That's your secret sauce, just so you know.
Acknowledging and validating. Yeah. Learn how to ace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and be okay with criticism. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It should happen. If it's not happening, people are blowing smoke up your butt.
Yeah. That's
right?
the truth.
You need to have people from all different walks giving you their feedback. And I welcome criticism. I enjoy it because it shows me where there's a blind spot, maybe there's something I'm missing, or there's something I'm doing really good, but it just doesn't fit their circumstances. I welcome it.
Criticism can be constructive no matter what form it takes, depending upon how you take it and the intention you have behind listening to that criticism. It doesn't matter the intention of the person giving it. It matters on your intention in listening to it and making space. And, not all advice is good advice. Not all criticism is accurate criticism.
Yeah. Yeah. And as they grow, and for those coaches who are already on that growth continuum, and maybe they've gone past the virtual VA and they're now working into collaborating and hiring more permanent staff, there's conversations around performance and conduct and expectations and outcomes that need to happen that are just uncomfortable because they've gone from a solopreneur and now they're building and expanding out. So how do I make sure that they have the same buy-in to this organization that I want them to have? And I need to know I can count on them. And what does that look like? Those conversations can be difficult. I would still go to those 5 steps. What is your intention when you hire this person? How are they going to help you? And really detail out all of those things that you want them to do. It's easy for someone to say, help, I need a social media marketer, and then just put out thousands of dollars and not really understand, which is what I think the gift of being an entrepreneur is. When you come up from the ground, you've had to do all those things. You have a sense of what's working, what's not working, with your limited knowledge maybe, but to be open and expansive that they can come in and say, hey, this is what was not working because you didn't have these elements and I can help you build that. That's why you need to have those conversations and know what you're looking for.
Yeah. And what I loved about you talking about earlier is the planning. When you talked about planning and going back to your policies and procedures and say, well, what did I have outlined here? Was something not clear? And in the terms of bringing on team members is having a very clear job description.
Yeah.
And you can have a basic job description, but then bring in too, like what kind of buy-in is it that you want the person that you're bringing on to have?
And what are your expectations? Be clear about
that.
Because when you have to come back and course correct, or you have to revisit, say, hey, you're not quite. For example, one of the people that I learned from, it's a podcast, and I can't remember the name now, it's been a while, but they talk about owning a metric. And so if your social media manager, for example, owns the metric of social media, what are they being measured against? Is it number of followers? Is it number of consults booked? Is it, number of likes on a post? What is it? And then they own it, but you need to support them as they create that. The conversation is very different than just hiring someone and giving them money saying, please make my business look good. You don't know what you're getting. Let them own that metric because that's their specialty and help support them to build your business. And when it doesn't,
having really deep conversations about, if you're hiring somebody, don't expect them just, to put on the hat and just run the business, that aspect of it. Really understand how you're measuring it. I love how you mentioned setting the expectations, because how can that person do a good job for you? And they said, well, they just hired me to do social media, so I'm going to make a couple of posts and like a few things. And is that sufficient? Or I'm going to have these, if you're hiring a social seller, I'm just going to do a few things in the DM and think that that is sufficient, that they're doing their job and they're feeling good about it, but it's not bringing you what you need. And then you having that difficult conversation, and it becomes difficult because your employee says, well, I didn't understand what you wanted.
Yes. I actually have a friend who's building her own business, medical aesthetics, and she's in this exact boat right now. Actually, ironically, she has now 2 different people working on her social media because the first one, she's just shelled out the money and doesn't have a sense of what direction, how to market herself. She was expecting them to do that for her. But that's such a collaborative process. You never want somebody external to be telling you what your business looks like or feels like. So instead of firing them, instead of figuring out those pieces that they're asking for, because she's just unsure, she goes, I don't know. How am I different? All ground level conversations.
Yeah.
She's got to hire another person to help her figure that out while she's still paying this person who has produced nothing for 6 months in her business in terms of income. Is it their fault? Is it her fault? Who knows? But the conversations aren't happening because there's this expectation that they just know what to do because it's their specialty. And that's why having expectations is so important when you're going to spend your money on someone else to help you build your brand.
Yeah. And kudos to her for reaching out to coaching, education support to help figure out her ground level so that she can share that information with her marketing person.
Yeah, right. But she's afraid to have the hard conversation. She's afraid to say, hey guys, like I've spent this much money on you and I've got 0 clients from this, and what's going on, you know?
Yeah, at
Because
some point you need to stop the bleeding and have that conversation.
yeah, and it's because there was no expectations outlined at the beginning. When you don't have that at the front as an entrepreneur, you feel there's a sense that you don't have a position to come in and say, hey, you guys, you're not meeting the mark. Performance, conduct, those are 2 different things. If they don't own the metric, they can't do what they need to do. Yeah.
That's the truth. So Tammy, let's go through your 5 steps again.
Yeah, so the first one is setting an intention. So for example, okay, we talked about, let me see, let's pull out another example because the VA one, the middle growth person. One of the girls in my coaching program, struggling with how to have a conversation with the VA. So what is her intention? She writes to the group, hey guys, help. I've spent all this money and it seems like $1,500 gets me about 20 hours of work when I expected it would be 40. What do I do? From the outside, that looks pretty easy, right? But what she's really asking is, how do I deal with this in a professional way that I can go back to trust her? Because I don't trust anymore because this is now the 3rd time I've spent all this money and I'm not getting what I want. I think I'm getting ripped off was her underlying tone. Hard conversation, right?
Yep.
How do you say to someone, hey, you're ripping me off here?
Yep. I have a colleague who went through something like that, similar with a designer. And it seemed like the designer kept promising that deliverables would be done within a certain time frame. And each time the time frame came up, there were no deliverables. And my colleague had to do the work herself. And I mean, she does beautiful, perfect work, but she hired this person for a reason. And even though the person that she hired has this beautiful portfolio and can do the work, it just wasn't getting done on time. And so it was having that conversation that was difficult for her.
You know what? And I've done the same thing. So like Fiverr, Upwork, Freelancer, all those different organizations where you can get some support. It's almost kind of like a really quick exchange and there's not a lot of conversation. I found that too when I was looking for someone to help me with a logo and a business coloring, branding. And I'm like, they didn't ask any questions, but they just wanted the money. And it felt really weird, right? So back to the girl with the VA, what she was asking was, actually what she was really asking is, how do I fire her?
Yeah.
And it was an interesting question because this lady was only held on retainer. She was contract work. There was no need to fire. It was just a thanks, work's done. So we had to set an intention. What is it you want? And she wanted to be a good person, but she also wanted to understand why it was costing her twice as much because she didn't trust her anymore. Awesome. That means now we can go into planning. How is this conversation going to look like? Because you're not firing her right away. You're actually wanting to be inquisitive, which I recommend. You're not going to find answers if you don't find out, if you don't ask questions. Came up with a list of questions for her. By the end of that, she was confident that she could have the conversation, gut check done, and then she was going off to do it. In the end, she did end up ending that relationship with the contractor because she could not get that trust back. She felt it just wasn't there anymore, and she went in a different direction. But with confidence and with clarity that the decision she was making wasn't just a fly by night, wasn't just a reaction. It was well thought out, and she had taken the steps to end the relationship.
That is beautiful. And one of the reasons that I love it is that there are no like energetic pulls. And when I talk about energetic pulls, it's like making a reactive decision based on just trying to end that association so that you can find somebody to help you, but you're still like regretting hiring the person, or you're still feeling, I should have said this, or I wish I had asked this. But she let it go with like, okay, it's not working for me. It's not working for you. And there's no animosity. We're just going to let this go. And I'm going to move in another direction, better informed.
That's exactly it. She took the learning out of that opportunity, right? She could have looked at it and fought for her limitations, She could have stayed in ugly stuckness, which it's gonna feel uncomfortable either way. You stay in
Yeah.
a relationship that's not working for you, or you have a difficult conversation that is the pathway to the success that you're looking for. Both are uncomfortable. You choose where you want to go.
Yes. Tammy, this has been wonderful. Tell me, because you have a special gift for our attendees.
I almost forgot all about that. Yes, I do. Thank you for asking, Trina. Yeah, what I find is starting the conversation is the hardest part.
Mm,
What do I say when is probably the biggest question that I get asked. So I know that from that, there's a lot of intention to find resolution. People are just afraid to get started. It's what I was struggling with too, because I was like, what do I say to make my bully stop? In terms of hard conversations, I have a free download called Safe Conversation Starters. There's 10 different ways to bring up a difficult topic. Now, these go through the 10 most offensive behaviors you would see in a workplace. So from nonverbal behaviors, maybe someone's not responding to your requests anymore for work. Perhaps when you get them on the phone and you're talking or through Zoom, they sigh a lot or they roll their eyes when you make a request of them. How do I address that in a safe way? Because sometimes sometimes that should be addressed right away. So there's 10 different situations and scenarios where I give you a scripted response that you can open up the conversation in a very safe way that's a non-defense arousing. We want to make sure that we're giving them an opportunity to step in to meet us where we are in order to explore the issue so that we can find a collaborative resolution. So that is my gift to the listeners, and I'm sure we're going to put the link below. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The link and how to contact Tammy, work with her. I mean, Tammy is a genius when it comes to creating these relationships and creating conversations. So yes, definitely. There will be all of the connection information below.
Perfect. That's awesome. And that was so kind of you to say that I'm a genius. I do enjoy working with conflict and tension. I don't know why. Run into the fire, not out. It's just how I am.
You are a first responder. You are a nurse. You're the front line.
Yeah,
And I couldn't really think of anyone better dealing with that kind of conflict than someone in the healthcare field, than a nurse.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Tammy, it has been an absolute pleasure and honor to interview you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to be here.